Hi, I'm Alex,
Hi, I'm Liz.
and welcome to the Research Room, a space to make research by the people for the people.
Perfect synergy.
And today we are going to be talking about resilience. And actually, this whole month we're going to be talking about resilience. We have a whole lot of different topics dealing with just the one title of resilience. There's so many things that go into it, right? To think about like what makes a resilient person. Like it's not just one simple thing. So there's so many things that go into it that we decided we're going to take a whole month to try to unpack that.
As we
Um,
rightfully should,
right.
doing due diligence.
Exactly, as we should, because like, I mean, we live in such a crazy time right now, right? Like this is not an easy period of our lives. I think that resilience is probably a pretty appropriate topic to cover.
Definitely.
Um, so we have this paper here today. It is titled Disaster Preparation and Recovery, Lessons from Research on Resilience in Human Development. This is by Mastin and Oberdovic back in 2008. So this is not that new of a paper. This has been around, but like this paper also came out after 40 years of research on resilience. So like this is a nice just kind of review of the literature up until this point to tell us like, hey, what have we actually learned here, and like what's left over for us to learn. So it's yeah, very well done paper. And yeah, I mean, just thinking again about like all the different things that are happening in our lives right now. You can think about like, I mean, your own personal lives, and like you could also think about like just in society, all the different disasters that are happening, whether that is man-made or if that is a natural disaster. I mean, unfortunately, there's no shortage of things that are happening. So the more that we can like cultivate this idea of resilience, like yes, it doesn't solve all the problems, but like it can make at least going through these things a little bit easier. So I'm going to read just like one quote that I think, like again, this is written back in 2008, but like it's is just as true now. So, a threat of catastrophe looms over the beginning of the 21st century, which opened with an alarming sequence of massive disasters in the form of terrorist attacks, wars, a tsunami, hurricanes, and outbreaks of disease. The mass media are saturated with stories of a possible flu pandemic and a global warming, along with the reports of ongoing genocide, terrorism, and natural disaster events. If only they were living in 2021.
So relevant to what is happening right now. It blows
Yes.
me like away. I'm like, how is this accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like it's so insane that like literally word for word, that is exactly what we're experiencing
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
And it's only gotten worse, like with environmental disasters only getting worse, with terrorism and the attacks that I mean the US either takes part in or is a victim of. There's plenty of things that happen. So like how can we think about resilience? How can we actually like form this idea in our heads and like work together to hopefully like build a more resilient society moving forward? Um, yeah, that's yeah. Like we could spend our whole podcast on this. We're not going to linger on how negative society is right now.
Yeah.
We do want to focus on the positive. So maybe Liz, if you could just like tell us what is resilience, at least what how can we think of it right now?
Yeah. So I like how they define it here, but I mean it is kind of subjective. So let me first like read the quote. So it says to judge resilience, one must decide whether there has been exposure to significant adversity or risk, and whether the person, or more broadly, the living system is functioning effectively and doing what it's supposed to be doing. So yeah, I feel like that's like very encompassing, but at the same time, it could be viewed as like relatively subjective, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so yeah, the whole idea of like, are you doing what you should be doing? Like, what?
Yeah.
Who does what? Like, that does not apply to everyone. Like, I mean, it does apply to everyone, but like, what that means to everyone is, of course, different. So, like, yeah, it's super subjective. But I most wonder, like, is that the better way to go about this? Because resilience is so subjective, because everyone's context is different, because everyone's backgrounds are different. Like, should we leave it at that more like subjective like stage?
Yeah, I feel like there's a place for that, because when we're thinking about certain like, populations and stuff, like let's consider like, ethnic minorities, right? They're going through like more obstacles and challenges. So, right, like resilience there might be so different than it is for like the majority population or somebody who belongs to that.
Right. Yeah. There's tons of research on this idea that just like, I mean, everyday life is just, it's different if you are the
Yeah.
majority versus the minority, and like it could be super like overt sorts of like discrimination that you're facing, but it also could be like other things that just like don't really like, they're not consciously like in your attention or anything like that, but like just the idea of like having to fit in, like having to assimilate to another culture that's not necessarily yours. Like if you grew up a different way, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, now you have to like start like socializing with all these other people that like they talk in a different way, they like bring up
Yeah.
different topics, they like, yeah, it's just it's different, right? And it's stressful, and that like that's going to seep into your body and like your psychology as well.
It's interesting too in terms of like how many events, right? So like one person may experience so many events, right? And it's kind of like one compounded upon the other. So I feel like
Hmm.
research needs to take that into account, that things are like very complex and like multifaceted at the like individual level.
Right. And I think this paper, like luckily, so this isn't necessarily like the empirical kinds of articles that we've been going through so far, where it's not like a study that they did themselves to like capture resilience and see like what were the predictors or outcomes or anything like that. They really just wanted to see like a little bit more, like I'll say theoretically, like how things unfold, like what are the things that go into resilience, what are different pathways to it, and like this, like that all just reminds me of like what you just said, Liz, that like if this if it's something that like compounds, right? Like what one person's starting point is going to be different, how they end up like dealing with disaster is going to be different, like because everyone's just like at different stages
Yeah.
when things happen. And like, yeah, I mean, I think this paper focuses mostly on like huge, like stressful kind of events. But we can also think of like just everyday resilience. Like it's a tough thing just to like go day by day, um, to live, right? There's plenty of like work stressors, or like just like talking to like, I don't know, your partner, like other friends that like might be going through things, like,
Right.
or you're going through something, right? So yeah, there's this everyday kind of resilience, but this does end up focusing more on the like huge, like this is like an event that's really impacting everyone, and then
Like
seeing,
threatening context, that sort of
right.
thing. Yeah.
So they end up doing like a really good job here, where like like I mean, maybe I should have said that first. Like I really like this paper. Like it's
Yep.
I mean, it's not a psychology paper. It's in human ecology, right? Like it's a little bit different. Yeah, very related, of course, but yeah, I mean, just how multifaceted they were thinking when they're thinking about resilience. It's not any one component. It's really the everything that you should be
Yeah.
thinking about.
That's why it's so
So,
interesting that they bring up, psychological things.
mm,
So in this paper, a big emphasis is on attachment,
mm,
so attachment theory, attachment style. So I thought it was cool how they were like borrowing certain ideas from like psychology, also like cultural anthropology, like Bronfenbrenner, things like that.
yeah. Oh, okay. So those are both super cool things. I will make sure that we circle back to that.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
first, let's continue laying out resilience. So like even for like the people viewing this right now, like you can think about like maybe you have like the prototypical person in your mind, like that person's like super resilient. Like you can think of like that kind of person, and like maybe maybe you're that person, maybe you're not that person. There's no judgment either way. We all have things to be dealing with, but you probably have some sense of what resiliency means, right? But I think this paper does a really good job of just like outlining it's not just one thing. Like resilience can really be multiple different things. So they have a figure here that I will hopefully share my screen correctly.
A very involved figure,
Yes, it's
lots of
gonna be
arrows.
it's gonna be very involved. I will try my best to walk through it, and Liz will hopefully help me as well.
No guarantees.
Let me put this in presenter view. Okay, so what we have here is maybe a few things from the top. We have a pre-disaster phase, a crisis phase, and a recovery phase. So what does that mean? Pre-disaster phase is just your life right now. If nothing else was happening, if there was no disaster that had occurred yet, you're living your day-to-day life, right? That's wherever you are. And then a crisis phase. So this is right after the onset of like a natural disaster. Let's say there's a massive like earthquake that destroyed a lot of things. A lot of people were displaced, things like that. A major stressor that many people are feeling. That is the beginning of the crisis phase. And then we have the recovery phase. So after that, like it's an acute thing, right? Like it happened at one single point of time. The effects are, of course, more longitudinal than that and more chronic. But that's why we get into this recovery phase that like there's like the initial stress and then there's like the lingering stress that happens, and like what happens in that recovery phase. Some people might get better, some people might get worse. So then on the left side and this like y-axis, if we go from bottom to top, we have a maladaptive zone, an okay zone, and an optimal zone. And this is just thinking about how well people are functioning. Are they functioning at like a relatively like poor kind of level where they're like very stressed out and like they're just not able to like really process and grasp everything that's happening? Are they in this okay zone where like, I mean, maybe they're not feeling like great, but like they are still like at least functioning well. They're doing their day-to-day like tasks and they're more or less fine. And there's the optimal zone, which is like, that's like even better than like
ideal.
Right, exactly. And so I'm going to reveal all the lines. It'll take a second to go through everything here. So these are all different resilience paths. And some of them will show the more like typical, like when I think of resilience, this is what I would think about. And then there's all these other types of paths that could occur. So maybe I'll just like actually start with, as long as you can like see it well,
Yeah,
there is, there's a line C, and line C here is the typical resilience path where you're in your pre-disaster phase, you are in the okay zone, you're fine, you're living your day-to-day. And then the disaster happens, whatever that disaster is, and that takes you down, as you can see here. Can you actually see the cursor? Like if I'm
I can. Yeah.
Okay, great. So that is, you can see there's a pretty steep drop off. You're no longer in that like okay zone, but that's fine. That's normal. Like people get stressed out. You don't always have to be in that okay zone. But disaster happened. You need to recover from it. And you will probably stay there for a little bit as you are just like psychologically like figuring out like, oh, like, wow, like I didn't like necessarily expect like this was going to be so damaging. Like even if you did expect it, like that doesn't matter. Like there is literally just a lot of damage to have to deal with. So you're going to be stressed out for a little bit, but eventually you'll come back up. Things will be okay. Maybe that's a month from now, maybe that's 6 months from now, but eventually,
at some point.
right. So you come back up, and that's what you might expect for like most people, and that in itself is resilience. Even though it doesn't seem like, oh, like like I was doing super well or anything like that, but like just the mere fact that like you went through something like a super hardship, but you made it back, like you're fine. That in itself is resilience. There's these other paths though that show that like people actually can end up better than where they were before. So that's like with lines F, with line E, and that might be the only other one here. Yeah. So lines E and F, those two end up getting better after the fact. So after the disaster happens, they actually start functioning better. And like the difference between these two, though, is that beforehand, one wasn't necessarily doing so well. The other one was doing pretty well. But that doesn't end up mattering, right? Like it's, and that's what makes like resilience so complex. Like you wouldn't necessarily expect somebody that like if they weren't doing well before, like why are they suddenly doing better now? But it's like there's so many things that happen with like huge kind of disasters, right? Like if you are now forced to have to like help people, if you're now forced to like become a part of the community, like maybe that person was feeling like kind of isolated beforehand, but like now that this hurricane hit, like now I'm like relating to other people on a different level that like I hadn't related to them before, right? And so now, I mean, you're helping them, you're passing out water bottles, like you're helping people like get things out of their house, like whatever it is, and you just end up feeling a little bit better after that. Like
Maybe you like took your relationships for granted
mm,
before, and then like that event like prompted you to like really think and be like, oh wow, I really should like cherish the people in my life, something like that.
yes, yeah, that's such a good point. And like again, like that is not like to judge anyone. Like we all do that, right? Like we get stuck in the day to day. We kind of forget, like, oh yeah, like I haven't actually like expressed any gratitude to anyone in a while. Like, but like these are things that like really they're important to our psychology, to our well being, to like our own just like human fulfillment, right? Um, so we have that kind of person. We also have another person that like they were doing pretty well and then they do even better, and it's like oh girl, like I hate you, perfect person, but um
Tell us how you really feel.
right. But like these might be like the natural born like leaders, if that like, actual person exists, right? Like those are the people that like they were doing pretty well, like they're doing well in work, like they probably had like good social connections, and then they saw like, oh, there's like a need here, like for me to like actually like to maybe take charge, or like to maybe like do something about this situation, and like they just like function even better now that it's necessary, I guess. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's good,
Yeah.
good outcome.
Right. If only we could all be that person, but like whatever. um, okay, so there's those kinds of resiliency paths. I think a lot of people like also like in the scientific like literature that they would classify that as like resilience, right? It's not only that like you went through something, but like you ended up a little bit better because of it. But there's another type of resilience, which is line A here, which is um, it's a path of just like you're resisting the stress. Like you're okay before. You don't even like dip. Like I'm sure you're probably stressed, but like you're as far as like functioning goes, like you're pretty much the same. Like you still probably realize like you're fine, you're alive. Like maybe everyone else around you is fine too. Like you're lucky in that kind of sense. And then like yeah, like you don't dip, you don't end up any better because you still had to go through a hardship. But it's resistance to that stress, and that's also very resilient, right? Like just again the fact that you didn't go down, and you're functioning, your well-being is still intact. um, I won't spend too much time on the rest of these. The rest of them are, though, like the more negative paths when it comes to resiliency. That um, there's, of course, like the flip side of it, where when something happens, like, and understandably, when something happens, like you don't necessarily recover from it, and that is like I hope with anything that I ever say here, like that is never to be taken as like because you're not strong enough, because you're not like smart enough, because you're not whatever enough, right? Like that is not the message here. That is not,
Right.
and like scientifically, but also like personally, like I'm not going to say that because resilience is just so multifaceted. There's so many different things to be thinking about, like if you've come from a family that like just never gave you support, or if like you don't even know who your family is, right? Like and you like feel displaced in life, like and then this major thing happens, like yeah, of course, like I'm not going to blame you for now feeling a little bit worse because like you had a hurricane just like storm through your village, right? Like that would be insane. And like yeah, at the governmental level, they're probably also letting you down. Like at other levels, like there's just other things that are happening with that. So like that's lines B, D, G, or H. Like those are again just like the flip side of resilience. Anything that you want to say, Liz? Because I've been blabbering on for a
Well, I
bit.
think the last thing, what you said is like really telling and kind of
Mm,
like can help segue to the next part because,
mm,
everything's interrelated. It's not just like your everyday like situation like path, but it's also like you said, the government, different things that are going on, right? So like the large systems. So I feel like everything's like interrelated in that sense, right?
right. Yeah. So let's maybe unpack that a little bit more. Let me stop sharing this because when it comes to resilience and like when it comes to most psychological things, really, like we shouldn't just be thinking about the individual. Like the individual of course has a place and we should think about them to some degree, but like what is an individual? They are a collection of other things, right? Like they are a collection of their past experiences, and their past experiences also involve like other people, other organizations, other like communities, right? So I mean maybe Liz I could even explain this better than I can. But I mean, do you want to try going through through like Bronfenbrenner's?
Yeah, so like I mean Bronfenbrenner, like the biggest idea is that like everything is like interrelated, right? All of these, like we have like the macro system, the micro system, and like peers, family, everything's like interrelated. So it's basically an ecological development model, saying
Mhm.
like all the outcomes are like multifaceted in that sense. But there's also like this cultural anthropological way to look at it as well. So it's like the macro system and the micro system. So it's like the idea that there's like a big C and a little c. So like your big C is things like, what is it? Societal values, politics, all of that. Whereas like little c is things like family, parental communication, norms and expectations that are part of your everyday life. So it's basically just like how they all combine, to like form these outcomes.
Right. Yeah. So if we were to like maybe think about that in just like an everyday practical sort of sense, let's say you're living your life again, and like you're fine, everything's okay, no positives, but no necessarily any negatives either. But like we also have to think about all these other people that are in your life. So let's say you are married, you're at home, you've been having an okay day, but your partner comes home and they have not had an okay day. They come in, they're very stressed out, and their stress starts to like spill over onto you, right? Like they might snap at you, they might be a little bit angry, they might like wonder like what have you been doing all day, like or it might even like hopefully this doesn't actually happen, but they might be resentful that like you have had such a like all right day, like you should be suffering like me.
That's probably not healthy, but
Not healthy, but I mean I can imagine that it happens, unfortunately.
yeah.
So these are the sorts of things that like why we have to think about what's also happening in their context. These different levels of system. If you are a person that has been like historically disadvantaged in America, let's say, like, and the government just has never given you like the appropriate kind of like resources so that you could succeed. If you could find the jobs that you want to find, if you want to be able to like have enough money for your children, or like for just, I mean, to live for yourself even, right? Like not even, let's keep children out of this. Like there's enough problems
Poverty.
there,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I mean, you can also imagine how that person, like, I mean, that person could also become a very positively resilient person. That could also go unfortunately the other direction, right? Like where they just if something happens, like they just like topple over. Like I can't think of the better word for this, but like because there's been so much stress that has compounded up until that point, it's like that one last thing that was like that the straw that broke the camel's back, right?
You're just like, I've had enough. I can't anymore.
Right. So yeah, that's why we have to really like sit and think about like it's not just the person. Like if it was just the person, then like again, like psychology would be so easy if that was really the like the end thing here. But everyone has such unique experiences. Some of them have a subset of like good things. Some of them have a subset of bad things. And like, what does that mean? Like when they're all added together, like it's not just like a one-to-one like math like kind of problem, right?
Right.
So yeah, different levels of things that we should always be thinking about. But this also, unless there's something that you want to say, this reminds me of another question.
No, no, no. I was just thinking in terms of like Braun from Brenner, but yeah.
So because like we know that all these different unique like situations will build resilience in different ways, right? But should we also be thinking that resilience is different depending on the person? So like different adults, let's say, should we be like classifying what it means to be resilient different for different adults, or like and maybe an adult versus a child, like someone who hasn't like their brain literally hasn't developed yet to like be resilient, right? They don't have the coping resources, they don't have the emotional regulation. So like should resilience mean different things?
I definitely think so. I mean, just my own viewpoint is that like children, just in terms of like what you're saying, like development and also like parental, right? Relationships and upbringing, like they're not in control of their surrounding environment. They don't have a say. Like, well, that's not always, but like usually it's the case that they don't have a say. So it's difficult in that sense. So
Right. Yes. I mean, I'll bring it up. That I mean, you already kind of said a little bit about attachment, but like this idea of like attachment, right? That if you're not secure with the people around you, and especially like with your parents when you're at that young age, like why should you be resilient? Like there's so many other things that are happening. But again, that doesn't like predict it like 100%, right? Like just because you might be insecure in your attachment style, that doesn't mean you're not resilient. You could be very well resilient, right?
So that there's like this interesting like new theory that's, well, I shouldn't say new. It's like the
Mm,
past like 5 years or so,
mhm,
but it's called social defense theory. And
mm,
basically, they're trying to say that security can actually be like maybe maladaptive when it
mm,
comes to like threat and like stressful circumstances. So like
mm,
maybe in the case of like a hurricane or something like that, when people are trying to evacuate, right? You would think that security would potentially be would have like positive outcomes associated with that,
mm,
but it may be the case that people are kind of waiting back, right? Because they're trying to like rally up their loved ones. So what
mm,
happens is they actually delay, right, getting out when they really should be evacuating. So these people basically say with this theory that maybe like anxiety, avoidance, these are what we call conceptualize as insecure attachment. Maybe
mm.
they might be beneficial in some ways.
Yeah, that does make sense. If you, I mean, if you don't, unfortunately don't care about anyone, then you can just kind of take care of yourself and like you can build yourself up. And like in those literally like those super practical like kind of moments, like, are you staying behind to help anyone, or are you out of there already?
The avoidant
That's
people flee. So like they apparently the avoidant people, according to this theory, have like a
mm,
fight or flight. No, not fight or flight, or just like fleeing script. They just like
mm,
leave. They probably are not waiting for any loved
mm.
ones. They're like, I'm gonna book it and get out of here.
More power to them. Like, yeah, I think avoidant attachment styles definitely get a bad reputation, but like, there's definitely positives.
Yeah, there are.
All of this also kind of reminds me though, like I was literally just writing about this. So it's cool that like you're bringing this up. It's a different spin on like what you're saying, but like the idea of like secure attachment styles, like kind of potentially being like maladaptive, right? Like
Yeah.
if let's say I'm somebody's like secure base and like cool, right? I'm glad that I'm that person for you. But like if I am giving you help, I do wonder, like, at one point, am I like doing more damage by like giving help than like letting you build the resilience, right? Like if I'm
Right.
letting you just kind of like think through things, like if I'm always there giving you the right resources, like of course you feel supported and that's great. But then it's like, are you now also like, are you a capable like agent yourself?
Because I feel like that counteracts like resilience. Like you have to have that individual component to like really reflect and like understand and be able to like bounce back from the stress. You know, you can
Mhm.
take the support of other people, but really like you have to, from an individual perspective, kind of like just deal with it and cope. So
That's the lesson for today. Just deal with
just deal with
it.
it. I mean, there's a better way to say it, but essentially.
um I mean everything that we're bringing up, I wrote a list of like just different things that could why different people might be resilient. So like we talked about attachment. I think it does make sense, both like from the secure attachment standpoint, but also like from an insecure attachment standpoint. I think it might make sense to be resilient. But also this idea of agency, self-efficacy, mastery of your motivation system. If you are always looking for external sources, then like I think, yeah, it doesn't unfortunately make sense that like you probably won't be as resilient in these like super like crazy kind of like times, because like, yeah, I mean, what can you do? Like if all your resources are gone, like you now have to like really look at yourself and be like, can you deal with this or not? Um, and so, yeah, definitely things to be thinking about if you're not currently undergoing something. Hopefully, you can think about these things at other points. But I mean, that's also something crazy that happens, though, right? Like if a natural disaster happens, like people do kind of have these epiphanies. Sort of like Liz, you already brought up this idea that like you realize that like maybe you're taking things for granted before. These other kind of epiphanies might be occurring as well.
Yeah, definitely. I also like relatedly, it's
Mm,
interesting because you were talking about mastery, self-worth, that kind of
mm,
thing. So I thought it was really cool how the paper mentioned that looking at people like over time, so those who overcame adversity, they appeared more confident and
mm,
had reported more self-worth than those who weren't as
mm,
resilient. And also they looked at people who weren't yet resilient, but were on the trajectory towards success, they actually showed change before the resilience being manifested. So I think it's really telling, right? That we should be like tracking people like throughout time. Granted, you don't know when like a natural disaster or something is going to strike, but I mean, it would be cool to like plot people's resilience like over longitudinally over time and see like these changes firsthand.
Yes, totally. And I think there are definitely some surveillance sort of things that are out there that what I mean by surveillance is just like literally there are organizations that collect data to see in general what's happening, and like over large like geographic areas, not just like, well, surveillance can be like a very small thing. That's sorry, I'm making this more complicated than it should be. Surveillance is just that you are repeatedly sampling and measuring these people over and over again, and so you can see things like across time, like what is changing, what's staying the same, and like when these huge events happen, then we can also see like what were some of these predictors and what are some of like the major consequences from this, without ever having to like do that yourself as an experimenter. You don't want to like so crazily stress somebody out, right? You can't just like say like, hey, like you signed up to be in the study, I'm gonna now take away your home. Like that would be insane.
Take away your parents if it's kids, you know, no problem. You don't need parents.
Right? No, definitely not. So yeah, okay, so we're out of time for today, but there's so much more to talk about, and that's why we're devoting a whole month to this, right? So things to look forward to. We have just scraped the surface on resilience.
More to come.
Yes, definitely more to come. Hopefully from this talk though, you were able to get like a sense of what resilience is, as far as like a definition, but also like all the different paths that go with this, right? And that it's not just the individual, that there's so many other things that could potentially push people in either direction when it comes to resilience. So because of that, we want to now focus on like specifically what are consequences of this, and like going through all the different like literature again, we're going to see like things like what are some emotional kind of outcomes of this, what are some physical health kind of outcomes of this, mental health outcomes, things like that. So that's going to be next week. And then we're also going to be talking about like predictors of resilience. So like we sort of talked about that here, but like let's spend a little bit more time on that and like really unpack that. I think that would be nice. And then we'll end this month just talking a little bit more about like, I mean, do we even believe in this definition of resilience? And like, are we measuring it the way that we really should be? And maybe there's other things that should be going into it. So that's a look ahead on some of the things that we're going to be doing. Until then, we are also still making other content on our website, roomforresearch.com, as well as everything that we're putting on social media, which is at Room for Research on any social media platform that you can think of. And until next time, thank you for talking about resilience with me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we will see you next week, everyone.
Yes. Bye for now.
Bye.
With the sun will breathe.